White versus the Sicilian, Lesson 11, Part 2, Dragon Variation. This is Black's, White's 16th move, G4, Queen C7, G5. White acquiesces in the kingside pawns, becoming fixed, even though this rules out a pawn storm. In return, he secures his knight against Black's move of F5, and as White's move of G takes F6 would follow. This means that E4 can be considered an outpost, a fine station in the center for the knight. At the same time, Black's bishop on G7 has been enfeebled as unless White suffers a potential mishap. It is more or less permanently shut in behind the E5 pawn. Such a situation is very much likely to get on the nerves of a dragon player, who was no doubt looking forward to achieving an active game. H5, Bishop C4, Rook E D8. Nevertheless, we shouldn't exaggerate Black's misfortunes. He doesn't have to fear a kingside pawn onslaught. He is solidly placed in the center, and if he's lucky, there will always be the B file. Queen F2, A5, A4. This is the sort of move that might well elude a player inexperienced with facing the dragon. After all, in the section on the Nxd4, it is categorically stated the moves A2 to A4 and queenside castle don't mix for White. That sort of talk might put you off playing A2 to A4 forever. Things will be easier to understand if we consider two plausible moves that White didn't play. The first one being King B1 and the second A3. So now, why doesn't he play King B1? Now, Black can advance with A4 to A3. If White responds B2, B3 to B3, the Black pawn on A3 would be a thorn in his king's side. An ugly hole also appears on C3, which is almost asking for a deadly knight fork. Now, why doesn't he play C3? White wants to solidify his defenses along the B file with B2, B3. For this purpose, he wants his rook pawn on A4, not A3, so that B3 can't be undermined with A5, A4. Remember that the Black bishop is entombed on G7. If it enjoyed an open diagonal aiming at B2, then White's plan of A4, followed by White moving to B3, that follows would be suicidal. As a more positive consideration for White, by fixing the Black pawn on A5, he makes it a possible target in the endgame. A4, Queen B7, Rook H E1, Rook A B8, B3, Queen C7, Rook D2. Adams prepares to double his rooks along the only open file, and then probe for weaknesses. Rook A8, Queen G1, King H8, Rook E D1, Rook A C8, King B1, Rook B8, Rook D3, Rook B7, and Queen E1. The first step in a plan that is psychologically speaking difficult to meet. Adams intends to redeploy his bishop to B2 and create latent threats against the E5 pawn. Rook A8, Bishop D6, Queen D8, Bishop A3. Here, with the threat of White playing Knight C5, when Black's move of Rook B B8, followed by White's knight taking E6, and the F pawn taking back, leaving Black's pawn shattered. Rook b8, bishop b2, queen e7, rook 3 d2. Now black has to reckon with the rook sliding to e2, with the discomfort of the e5, when the discomfort of the e5 will increase. After all, if the knight moves from e4, it would be attacked 3 times. Knight c3 check. Rocha is unnerved by the nagging threat of e5, so plunges into active play that merely dismantles his blockade in the center. He should have waited calmly with a move like rook b7, when Adams would still have to find a way to break through, as 32 rook e2 fails to knight f4. Note, Adams wasn't lucky. He kept his opponent under... He wasn't just lucky. He kept his opponent under unremitting pressure until he cracked. We should try to emulate this strategy, especially against dragon players who are unusually unhappy at having to defend passively. So back here to knight c3 check. Bishop takes c3, bishop takes c4, rook d7. The lock gate has been opened and white's pieces fled through. Queen f8, knight d6, bishop e6, rook c7, c5. There was no good way to defend e5. Bishop takes e5, c4, knight takes c4, bishop f5, and queen c3, and black resigns.